From the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
We want to open today's show by remembering a frequent and favorite guest of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, Lois Limbach. Lois died on May 19, 2021. Lois often thanked her many friends at St. Francis for making her life wonderful. Those were her words. Lois was a thoughtful member of our yachting community, which she served in so many ways. She was our club's chair madame in 1987 and 88 after her husband Carl was elected chairman of the board. And then she was our club's commodoress in 1991 after Carl was elected commodore of our yacht club. During Carl's tenure, Carl and Lois made a donation to establish the first Yachtswoman of the Year award, amongst other changes to make the club more inclusive for women. Carl and Lois were active members of the Fairlawn Clipper wooden boat fleet, the Tinsey Island party scene, the Corinthian Island shoreline community, and the San Francisco Canal fleet, in which their daughter Lee raced number 140 for years. Early in her career, Lois worked as a school teacher to put Carl through law school. Carl would later return the favor, putting Lois through law school, which she completed when she was age 50. After passing the California bar on her first try, Lois practiced family law for a decade. She will be missed by all who knew her sharp wit, friendly smile, and gracious heart. Lois, thanks for sharing your family, your talents, your questions, and so many of your lunch hours with the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Those of you who've been sailing on the bay lately know that we're having an incredibly beautiful June in San Francisco. I raced in the Wednesday night race June 9th and kept looking at our YC and saying, why can't we go right into the club after the race? And the answer is soon we will be able to. So as I was sailing down the city front, I kept looking at the Golden Gate Yacht Club in anticipation of our recording today. Because in fact, our speaker today was inspired by a woman who was a member of a great sailor from the Golden Gate Yacht Club to write her book. Our speaker was born in Cincinnati, attended the University of Cincinnati, and then the Minneapolis School of Art and Design, where she earned a BFA in product design. Our speaker would go to Tonka Toys, and after beginning her toy design career at Tonka Toy, would land a job at Mattel, one of the biggest toy companies in the world. She would work in product design there and earn several awards, working in girls, infant, and preschool toys. She would have 3 children, which gave her yet an even keener interest in inspiring the performance of young people. And so she would come to write 3 books, the first of which, Women of Steel and Stone, features Ruth Schnapp, civil engineer and sailor from the Golden Gate Yacht Club, our neighbor club just east of St. Francis Yacht Club. With that introduction, Anna, welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Hi, Ron. Glad we're finally getting to meet face-to-face, kind of. I was truly honored when Ron asked me if I'd be a guest speaker for the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon series. I love talking about my women engineers. I love spreading the word about STEM in the schools, and I hope to encourage more girls to go into STEM fields by telling them the stories of amazing women in their chosen professions. And with talking to you today, I'm continuing Ruth's passion for speaking to young people about STEM careers. Today, I'd like to explain about how my book, Women in Steel and Stone, came to be. I'd like to give you a little background to how I chose my women in the book to understand why I chose Ruth as one of my ladies. Then I will tell Ruth Gordon Schnapp's life story. I have to add that I am not an expert on Ruth by any means, but I think in my chapter on Ruth, I present a clear, inspirational story, making her a role model for students. My book has been read by all ages, from 3rd graders to adults. Finally, I'd like to share the common threads I found in the stories of all my women, which kind of surprised me. Women of Steel and Stone, 22 inspirational architects, engineers, and landscape designers, was published January 2014, about 7 years ago. It's still selling well, and it appears on STEM reading lists often. The paperback came out in 2017, which coincided with the book winning a Best STEM Book Award. Here's a picture of the cool award that wound up on the paperback copy.
Bravo, bravo.
Thanks, Ron. When my editor at Chicago Review Press and I first started talking about writing a book for their Women of Action series, I had to find a subject to focus on. I had a degree in product design. I had a passion for architectural history, and I studied architecture and design history in college. Also, my father owned an engineering office in Cincinnati for over 40 years. So growing up, I worked there over the summers for him, and I knew that there weren't very many women in those offices. So I started working on a proposal. I Googled 100 top architects. Out of that list of 100 architects, there were only 2 lists. What I'm showing here is a list of current top architects, and there's about 8 women on that list. So times are kind of changing. But 7 years ago, I just thought that was ridiculous. And then I started doing research. And you know what I discovered? There are some awesome women architects that we've never heard about, and some women engineers and women landscape architects. And I decided that girls and basically all readers need to learn about them. There were 2 important factors in my picking each woman. First, I had to tell a story about their life. Even better if there was a moment from their childhood that was important in their career choice that young readers could relate to. I also didn't want to basically recreate a Wikipedia page on each woman. And 2, per my book contract, I had to include 2 photographs per each woman. This turned out to be harder than I thought. I had to track down families of these women, the older architects. There was no photographs of them. Thing is, I fell in love with all these women. Their stories are all different. But as I explain later, there did seem to be a common thread in each story. Also, what popped up in my research was Architect Barbie and Computer Engineering Barbie. I started to wonder about how a girl would play with Architect Barbie. Growing up, I knew how to play Dr. Barbie or Teacher Barbie or Astronaut Barbie because I had seen them in action. But girls haven't seen architects or engineers in action. I mean, really, our only exposure to an architect was Mike Brady on the Brady Bunch. And now the star of today's presentation, Ruth Gordon Schnapp. Her introduction begins. Unlike many students, Ruth Gordon Schnapp loved solving math problems and savored her math homework. In 2006 interview for the Society of Women Engineers, Ruth explained, "In college, I saved my math homework for dessert because that was the most fun." Her passion for math led her to embark on a structural engineering career that included building safer schools. While in first grade, a teacher coached Ruth in engineering and math during lunch hours. This allowed Ruth to skip the remainder of the school year and advance to second grade. Ruth also skipped 7th grade, so she entered Queen Anne High School when she was just 12 years old. She loved math, music, and Latin classes. The country was in the midst of World War II, and the government needed people who were good in math and physics. Ruth was placed in an experimental advanced math class in which she studied trigonometry, algebra, and statistics. These special studies fueled Ruth's interest in math. Ruth's other love was piano, and she played with the choir and orchestra all through high school. At her graduation in the huge auditorium, she played George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. After the performance, she dreamt of becoming a concert pianist. But her parents warned her that you can never tell what's going to happen. You have to study something for which you can make a living. In 1942, society typically told young girls that they should be preparing themselves for marriage and having children, not thinking about how to support a family. So Ruth's parents were unique. She said, "At that time, it was very unusual for a man to believe that women should be treated equally as men and have a higher education, especially a man like my father, a streetcar man." She thought, "Well, I better do something else. I'll be an engineer. I have no idea what they do, but I know that they use math." Ruth's mom ran into a friend who told her that her son had just received a scholarship to MIT. Ruth's mom suggested that Ruth apply for scholarships too. Ruth applied to MIT, Purdue, and Stanford, all well known for their engineering programs. She said, "When I wrote to Stanford, I didn't even know where that was." When they accepted me, I had to find out where it was. I was required to take an IQ test and got number 1 on it. During summer breaks, when Ruth returned to Seattle, she worked for the Aerospace and Defense Corporation, Boeing. Her first year, she was a troubleshooter in the engineering department. Her second summer at Boeing, she worked on changes to the B-17 bomber. On August 14, 1945, the Japanese surrenders, ending World War II, and Ruth sang in the streets with all the Boeing employees. The next day, the Boeing personnel department sent all the women employed in so-called male jobs to take a typing job with the company for lower pay or else quit. Ruth thought that was outrageous. With only 4 or 5 weeks left before she went back to school, she became the slowest typer that they had ever had, just despite Boeing and its sexist practices. On the first day of classes at Stanford, there were only 15 women enrolled. By the second year, only 3 remained. Ruth was the only woman to graduate from Stanford in 1948 with a degree in civil engineering. The other remaining women in the engineering program graduated with electrical engineering degrees. Before graduation, a professor called them into his office separately. He wanted to know if they were really serious about engineering. After Ruth responded that of course she was serious, he sighed and said, "Well, women." One night, while Ruth was in graduate school, a friend invited her, along with other 22 classmates, to his parents' house for dinner. Ruth soon discovered that the house was the very same one in which Lillian Gilbreth, the famous industrial engineer, had grown up in. The boys' parents took a liking to Ruth and they became friends. Ruth would stop by the house and visit for a few minutes on her way to class. One day, Ruth went around back of the house and noticed a man working under his car. When he stood up, Ruth faced the handsomest man she had ever seen. After a few months of dating, he suggested that they fly to Reno and get married. When Ruth told her friend, the owner of the house, about the plan, her friend insisted that they be married in their house instead. So Ruth and Mike Schnapp were married in Lillian Gilbreth's old house. When Ruth began looking for a job, she soon learned to use only her initials on applications because employers never responded when she used her first name. I found that happening many times with all the women in my book. At several companies, secretaries flat out told her as she walked in the door, "We don't hire women engineers." Finally, Isidore Thompson, head of a San Francisco structural engineering office, hired Ruth. He told her that he didn't care if she was green, just so long as she could do the job. Ruth was hired on a Friday, and she was asked to start Monday to work on building a hospital in Southern California. This hospital incorporated the new technology of welding fastenings. When she returned home that night, Ruth complained to her husband that she didn't know anything about welding. Relieving her fears and showing his support, Michael assured her Ruth that they had all weekend to learn. That first job with Isidore Thompson was an important stepping stone for Ruth that led to work for other engineering firms in both design and construction, including the Bechtel Corporation. While at Bechtel, Ruth noticed that male employees hired after her with exactly the same credentials were paid more than her. When she asked her male boss about this, he explained that those men had families to support, as if she didn't, and that her career was somehow optional. One day at Bechtel, a colleague asked Ruth if she wanted to work for the state of California. The only thing Ruth needed to work for the state was to take the exam to become a state-certified civil engineer. She passed. Ruth worked for the state of California for 29 years, designing and constructing school buildings to make them more resilient to earthquakes. I was in charge. They might have hated it, but they had to be nice to me. She also insisted her crews fix all structural problems to existing buildings to bring them to compliance with current building codes. 6 years after receiving her engineering license, Ruth decided to try for her structural engineering license. To qualify for that license, one must be already licensed to be a civil engineer, have worked for a minimum of 3 years under the supervision of a licensed structural engineer, and pass a grueling 16-hour exam. Only 25% of candidates pass the first time they take the exam. But the night before the test, Ruth was awake all night taking care of her son, Michael, who had a temperature of 104 degrees. In a 2006 interview, Ruth explained how she felt after the test. I don't think I passed. I was kind of sleepy. I didn't know if I had the energy to do it. It was so tough. Ruth passed the test and in doing so became the first licensed structural engineer in the state of California. It would be another 20 years before another woman would pass the same exam. I really love structural engineering, Ruth said, especially out in the field. Her position required that she travel 7-county, 200-mile radius area of Southern California, checking every public school, hospital, or any construction or reconstruction. Some of Ruth's more high-profile projects were the San Francisco Public Library, the San Francisco Asian Art Museum, San Quentin Prison, the Palace of the Legion of Honor, San Francisco General Hospital, and the Marin General Hospital. Ruth had avid interest outside of math and engineering. When she and Mike first married, they both agreed that they loved boats, and they bought a 26-foot-long sailboat and started racing. When Mike was recalled to active duty during the Korean War, Ruth became skipper. No men wanted to race on her boat, so she assembled a team of women. Every day after work, the women would practice back and forth through the marina. On race day, there was a lot of press about the all-girl sail team who sailed past 2 male crews. There's a quote from Ruth from her oral history, and she says, so anyway, then Mike came back and we were working and started having our family. And we decided the only way we could get a boat big enough for our family would have to be build it ourselves. There was a group of people, 4 people who got together and they had asked a famous designer, Myron Spaulding, design a boat that would be built by amateurs and be good in the bay and the ocean. So the first 4, they performed very, very well. And so then there were another 5 of us that bought plans in 1957. Let's see, we had just given birth to my 3rd baby, and Mike came and said, you have to pick a name for the boat. And she said, okay, I'm still just trying to figure out the name for the baby. And then he said, well, they want us all to have our names for our boats because they want to put the names on the YRA annual yearbook. So she said, I looked at the names and said, Pegasus appealed to me. He was the god of navigation of the ancient Phoenicians. So Pegasus it was. Due to her commitment to the sport for over 40 years, in 2001, Ruth received the Yachtsman of the Year award from the Pacific Interclub Yacht Association. Ruth, always going back to her engineering, jokingly pointed out that her sailboat was constructed in accordance with the same regulations as the earthquake safety for the public school buildings. Ruth summed up her feelings about her work in the 2006 interview. It's a very rewarding profession because you know that you're doing something for humanity, because engineering deals with safety. Every branch of engineering deals with safety. Ruth has talked to students at a long list of schools. When guest speaking in 2009, she said, I became very interested in helping young women and encourage women to be sure to study math and science because you never know where you're going to need it. During her retirement, Ruth lived in San Francisco with her 3 children and grandchildren, and she enjoyed knitting sweaters for her whole crew. She died on January 1st, 2014, at the age of 86. There are 2 stories that I didn't put in the book that I want to share with you. From a 1980 Stanford magazine article. When Ruth Gordon chained herself to the Pacific Stock Exchange on August 26, 1980, she was a bit concerned. Not that she'll be arrested or labeled as an upstart. As California's first female structural engineer, she heard that kind of name calling before. No, her anxiety sprang from a banner her fellow protesters had hung up on the building's facade, a banner that read, Down Jones Up, Women's Rights Down, ERA Now. It wasn't the wording that disturbed her, to the contrary. It perfectly stated her support for the Equal Rights Amendment and equitable pay in the workplace. But the 80-foot-long bunting was blocking both of the building's exits. I wanted to be arrested for trespassing, she explains, not for violating fire codes.
It's great. Engineer through and through.
Yeah, exactly. A story in the San Francisco Chronicle accused Ruth of telling her all-girl crew to wear shorts and low-cut blouses so they distract their men rivals during the race. That was appalling, Ruth says. I expected to face discrimination of a structural engineer, but not when I wanted to play. So she silenced their critics the best way she knew how, by proving herself as worthy as the competition. The Madeline didn't win the first race, but did sail past 2 all-male crews. I just want to mention also, too, that there are 2 other women in my book that have San Francisco connections. Julia Morgan, she designed and supervised construction of Hearst Castle in San Simeon, California. She traveled from San Francisco to San Simeon most weekends from 1919 to 1938, almost 30 years. But throughout her career, she designed and built over 700 structures, from small to large house designs to church, stores, hospitals, women's clubs, and college campuses. And I also in the book have Lillian Gilbreth, also known as the mom in Cheaper by the Dozen. Lillian gave birth to 12 children within 19 years, and their house became a laboratory for time, motion, and efficiency. In 1914, she received her PhD in psychology from Brown University. In 1926, Lillian was named the first female member of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. And I've listed on this screen other titles she's been called. So several things stood out to me while writing the book. First of all the women in my book, like Ruth, had supportive parents. Also, all the women chose their fields because they were drawn to their fields. They had a passion for the profession that they chose. They had a strong desire to do what they wanted to do and broke down barriers and proved that women could work in the same fields that men. And third, we haven't heard about these amazing women in architecture, engineering, landscape design because they weren't doing for fame or notoriety. They were doing for the love of their work. And lastly, it's been over 125 years since Louise Berthone became the first female member of the American Institute of Architecture, and women are still struggling to get noticed in STEM fields. After I wrote Women of Steel and Stone, I came across numerous studies by the ASQ, the American Society for Quality, about STEM. And I quote, while 97% of parents stated that they believe that knowledge of math and science will help their children have a successful career, only 20% encourage or will encourage their sons or daughters to become engineers. The STEM professions are perceived as being harder to achieve respect, equal pay, equal opportunities, etc., which creates a stressful career choice, and parents want their children to succeed. What do we need to do? Well, first, we need to continue to support the STEM agenda. When I look on social media, I see the outpouring of Facebook comments on, say, the A Mighty Girl page. I think, wow, there are a lot of parents who support STEM. But the thing is, those cheerleaders are just a small part of the big picture. We need to get all parents on the STEM train. When I'm out and about talking with people, at least once a day, a year and a half ago, I'd run into people that didn't know what STEM was. They would say, you mean stem cell? And I'd have to explain it's science, technology, engineering, math. And some people they were kind of insulted when I would spell out science, technology, engineering, and math. But I found many people didn't really know what STEM was. Second, Neil deGrasse Tyson says that maybe we need to hire a new marketing team for math and engineering, like maybe engineering, keeping the world safe. And Mattel got in trouble a few years ago for having Barbie say, math is hard. So I think Barbie maybe should say now, let's have math homework for dessert. Third, we need to start early to get our students thinking broadly to drive innovation. They will be solving the problems that we're going to be facing in the next 10 years, 50 years, or more. If you'd like to hear more about women builders, I highly recommend the podcast She Builds. She Builds podcast is a podcast, and I quote, featuring the seldom told stories of women who build, women whose worth is not taught in schools, but who have shaped the industries of architecture, construction, and development over the last century. The podcast was started by three friends who, after graduating from Syracuse University School of Architecture together, wanted to fill in the gaps in their education and share those with others. Every episode is entertaining, educational, and inspiring. The rapport between these three young architects is so much fun to listen to. And one of the architects lives and works in San Francisco. I will be a guest on the podcast soon, and they will be announcing a giveaway of several copies of my book that I'm donating because I love what they are doing to highlight the accomplishments of women in the built world. It is my hope that in my sharing of Ruth's story today, all of you are also inspired. I hope that all of you will follow in Ruth's footsteps and support the builders of our future.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. What a fascinating story, Hannah. Who is the lady that's shown on the front cover of the book? There's a woman standing, it looks like Las Vegas. What is she doing?
That is Denise Scott Brown. So all the women that are still alive were amazing in helping me with the book. And I even have a message on my machine from her. She just recently was inducted into the Pritzker Hall of Fame.
And so in that picture, she's standing before a early development in the Las Vegas skyline, it looks like, before some buildings were going up. What was her role? What did she do?
She wrote a book. She's more of a writer on architecture. And her book, I believe, is called Leaving Las Vegas. It has to do more with architectural theory, design. She was more of a teacher with her husband.
Tell us, who inspired you as a little girl, man or woman?
Well, actually, when I was young, I used to design and create toys for my little brother. So when I was 10 years old, I was sewing and creating toys. And that's what I was doing for fun. So when I was working at Mattel, I suddenly dawned on me one day, wait a second, this is what I did as a kid for fun. And not everybody did that. So I really don't know if I had any role models. That's a good question.
So did you say that you worked in your father's engineering office when you were a kid?
Yeah, I would go with him to sites to do inspections. He would give me plans that I would make corrections on for him.
What's the first toy you remember designing?
Oh, that was for Tonka Toys. I did a Coleman camping set, and I was still in college, so it was kind of cool to finally have one of my own designs on the toy shelf, and that kind of got my foot in the door for toy inventing. So I didn't really know what I was going to be going into. I didn't know if I was going to be designing cars or purses or tools.
You were part of the girls' toy group in Mattel. Talk to us about differences between a direction they might give you to do a girl's toy or a boy's toy.
I worked in the girls' toys for about 2-3 years. And I was at that time, the only, one of the few product designers. A lot of the other designers at that time were more illustrators. So I was able to work in 3D. In girls' toys, hair play is important. And I designed a line of teddy bears, which was a really fun project for me, how I came up with that concept. But I switched to preschool because I did want to work more engineering type products. I just really wanted to go back to my roots of product design. Also, at one point, I did a boys' toys 3-week brainstorming intensive. So I came up with a pretty fun car concept for boys.
A little bit about toy design. When you're given an assignment to design a toy, what's the initial organizing document that you're given? In the advertising world, you're given a brief. For instance, our boat Youngster was named back in 92, and I did a product naming session around the kitchen table with my then 8-year-old and 10-year-old daughters and my wife. And the brief was, old boat, looks brand new, owned by the Young family, points for humor, shorter is better. And then one kid, 10-year-old, said, forever young. We thought, that's amazing. I have a 10-year-old. And then the 8-year-old said, Youngster. It's just one word. So she gave us the name and the sort of pitch, if you were thinking in Hollywood terms. So that's the organizing document in the marketing world. What's the organizing document in product design, or especially toy design?
Well, this was 30 years ago, mind you. But when I was in girls' toys, I just had finished up a small doll line, and my boss said, "Hey, we need a stuffed toy." That's all she said. So I was given the full gamut of any type of stuffed toy at all. And that is actually one of my favorite toys to work on, because I just started brainstorming, what kind of thing would you make a stuffed toy out of? And I tell the story a lot to young kids, how to come up with ideas. I just love the brainstorming process. And I just did a really simple drawing of a stuffed teddy bear made out of sweatshirt material. And it's like almost immediately became a toy. So that was one of my most fun products to create. But also in preschool, at the time, do you remember those dancing flowers, voice activated? Designers had gone to Japan and they came back and they showed this dancing flower to my boss's boss. And my boss took it to me and said, "Can you design a toy using this technology?" So the dancing flowers became a crib toy called Dancing Babies. And I have a patent on that. And that's one of the toys that won Toy of the Year, was this voice activated crib toy for children. It was Mickey Mouse themed. At that time, we weren't really specifically told what to work on. And a lot of toys come in from outside consultants. So, and I was lucky that I was able to work on my own concepts, but a lot of concepts or ideas that come from the outside and that just are reworked and made into products for the toy company.
So now you've won several toy design awards and you've written 3 books. What is similar between designing a toy and writing a book?
Whoa, I love the idea process. With toy design, I know every toy that's been made. And I feel in the book world, in children's book world, I really have studied all the books that are done. And it's just coming up with a unique storyline or unique character. I've been working for the last year and a half doing actually more drawing and coming up with characters with drawing. And I just felt like I wanted to embrace my artistic side. So I've been having fun doing that. And I can spend hours just drawing away on something. So they say to do a job that it's not really a job, it's more like fun. So I've been having fun drawing.
So what are your drawing tools? Do you draw freehand, or do you use CAD, or do you use Photoshop or Sketch, or what do you use?
I've been using Photoshop actually, and it's been a whole with a Wacom tablet. And I'm left and right brain. So my dad was an engineer. My mom was a seamstress. She was strong in seeing 3D. So I can get into, the engineering side or the technical side of doing digital drawings. So I've been just trying to come up with a unique look, and it's just been fun. It's like playing. So
what's your platform? Are you Mac based or Microsoft based?
I'm Mac based. Yeah.
Mac based.
Yeah.
And so what are your tools? Do you have a MacBook Pro or a desktop, or what do you have?
Yeah, I've got a MacBook Pro. I've got a Wacom tablet to the side of me, which I can draw on. And then I've got a bigger screen up there that I can put different looks that I'm achieving while I'm drawing. So my husband is a computer consultant, and so I have all those tools available to me.
So when you write your books, talk to us about the process and what's the from ideation, from the beginning of when the first notion comes along to it being published.
Well, I actually was working with my editor, and we kind of narrowed it down to that topic. A lot of people just submit proposals to companies, manuscripts, and they could be working on some other idea already. So I kind of had a in with that one.
You say they could be working, you mean the publisher could already?
Yeah. They could be having other books that same way.
A related idea.
Right. And so, my editor said, write us a proposal, that we will be able to write this book. It turns out, though, that weekend that she said, go ahead and write that proposal, the next day my father passed away. So it was just a weekend of, big high and big low. So life does that, But yeah, I've been writing a lot of fiction too, a lot of picture books. I just become passionate about something that young readers should hear about and get inspired by, to think more creatively. And I have a business called Idea Splash, where I just like promoting creativity and getting children to think about how you come up with ideas. That's what I think is going to be important in the schools and important in businesses. Sorry, I went off on a little tangent there. So
Actually, I think it's a related tangent. I enjoy it. So the question is, how have you been surviving without people during the pandemic? And how has that affected your work product?
that is a good question. I am more of an introvert than an extrovert, so I like being at home. I like just suddenly think, oh, I want to work on this, oh, I want to draw on that. So I've been having fun being at home, but also I have a lot of different seminars that I've been participating in a group called SCBWI, which is Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, which is a huge organization. And when people say, hey, I want to write a book, what should I do? That's the first place where I tell them to go to, is to the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, SCBWI.
What are some of the advantages of being a female as an author?
Wow. I don't think that really plays a factor in it. There's a lot of controversy because a lot of men are in graphic novels. They tend to promote more men illustrators. I've been actually working on some early graphic novel concepts, and there's a lot of men in that field. I feel that there should be more women in that field. So that's kind of one of the things that inspires me to make a difference in that field.
Have you ever applied for a job or made an inquiry of any kind where you just used your initials because you wanted deliberately to disguise your gender?
No, not me. But back in the 50s, that was a big thing. A lot of people that have come up to me at book signing and said that's what my mom had to do. My mom was bridge builder, and she had used her initials. And then she showed up at a job site, and they were like shocked that a woman was showing up, that she was the builder. But that's what a lot of people had to do. So.
Now, I remember years ago, 20 or plus years ago, I remember just kind of peripherally being aware of the fact that Ruth Schnapp had tied herself to the Pacific Stock Exchange. What was the controversy that she was trying to increase awareness on?
I think it was equal pay for women engineers, because like I read from the book, is that she was finding that she was not being paid as much as the men were.
So women, when they apply for jobs these days, do you have any advice about whether they should wear pants or wear a dress or what? Give us any advice on that subject.
I would just say, just be comfortable. That's what I would tell my daughter. If you are comfortable, then you come across as being knowledgeable and knowing that you're the best person for that position. So I assume whatever a person is comfortable wearing.
Now, Ruth skipped the second and the seventh grades. Was that common to any of the other women in your 22 bios?
No, I really don't think so. Some of my landscape designers, which was cool about them, is that they liked art and math. And so they were able to express themselves as a landscape designer by incorporating art and math. So that's why I felt the three categories of architects, engineers, and landscape designers just was a good grouping of women. It takes a lot of editing. That was one of the things that was big with my book, and that is important with books that are not self-published, is we had several rounds with the different copywriters editing my book and making each chapter sound similar in voice. The editing part, I guess, is the hardest part for me. I just like to get the ideas down, and then you got to sit there and rethink everything you said.
So how much of the book, essentially, as they smoothed out the thematic component chapter to chapter, it sounds like. So is that a 10% change of the book? Is that a 5%, a 30%? How much of a change would thoughtful editing like that, which enhances the character of the book?
I would say maybe 20% of the book, just the wording and the phrasing. And I wrote biographies of 22 women, and I wrote it within a year, and that included doing all the research with the pictures. And that took a long time to come up with pictures because I couldn't pick a woman until I had the rights to those pictures to put in the book. And then as you're doing the research, as you probably know, a lot of the research out there that you find on the internet may not be true. One of my women, they said everywhere I read, her middle name was Mary, right? But when I gave the chapter for her to proof to, say that everything is correct, so they're like, no, my real middle name is Martha, So it's just amazing, all the research that you really have to get down to primary sources to find what really happened. And also, like with Julia Morgan, several books say that the reason why she went into architecture is because when she was 5 years old, she was dusting the rungs of her stairs at her family house. And she said, I'm going to design a house where little girls don't have to dust the rungs on their stairs. And that's the way some books start out, by talking about her and going back through the oral histories of her relatives. They say, no, she didn't really say that. So I was really digging, and it was 22 biographies, and it about killed me. So it was a lot of work.
What is your writing process like? When do you start writing in the morning, and when do you finish?
Oh, that's a good question. My daughter's always pushing me, saying, Mom, okay, it's Monday. She's in publishing, and she's an amazing editor. And she'll say, okay, Mom, I want you to write 500 words for me today. By the end of the day, I want you to send them to me. So that's kind of cute. And, this last year and a half, it's been hard sometimes to sit down and actually write, you really got to be in the right frame of mind, and just try to find that creative energy. And it's funny how sometimes the days it will hit, and that's what I love about it is, just embracing that energy and creativity and where those ideas come from. So
what was the outline like? Was it just 22 women's bios, or did you have more of I wanted a few architects, a few engineers, how did you outline this subject?
22, I divided in, I think I had 8 architects, 8 engineers, and 7 landscape architects. And I had to do a whole intro for the whole book, and then an intro for each grouping of women. And then in the back is full of resources for young girls when they're reading this, and then a dictionary of terms that are used. And actually, up until right before it was published, the book was called The House That Jill Built. But when they showed the cover of the book to the marketing and sales team, they didn't understand what the house that Jill built meant. So my editor said, can you come up with some other titles for us? So I brainstormed, which I love to do, 50 different titles. And actually, Women of Steel and Stone was one of my favorite titles. So that's the one they went with.
So what's the money side? Do you go to the publisher, have them give you an advance, and then you get paid as you got chapters done? Or tell us how the money flows.
Okay, I got an advance when I signed the contract. With that advance money, I had to use that to pay for the rights for the photographs. And in publishing world, it's about half and half. Half the time the publisher will pay for the photographs, and half the time you pay for the photographs. And in fact, my publisher wanted me to write some other books for them, like one on Andy Warhol, but the rights to the Andy Warhol pictures, even though we were negotiating with them, were just way past what my advance would be.
What percent of the total payment would be in advance? 50%, 10%, 20%?
That was a third of the payment. And then when you turn in your manuscript, they give you the other 2/3. And then when the book actually is published, they give you the last third. And then every 6 months, I get royalties checks on the book. The book came out on January 1st, but the book actually started selling December 1st. So it started selling a month early. So actually by January 1st, my book had half sold out my advance. So a book is considered a success if it sells its advance. So the day it was published, it already had sold out half its advance. So that was pretty exciting.
That's great.
I've been kind of obnoxiously promoting it. And so why not, So I just want this book to get into more kids' hands.
So Anna Lewis, it's great having you as a speaker for the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. When you next travel to San Francisco, even with your daughters, you're welcome to come sailing on San Francisco Bay, right in front of the yacht club that Ruth Schnapp was a member of. And I'll even take you to Myron Spaulding's yard where the Spaulding 33s were built. And it's been our pleasure to have you as a guest to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Thank you very much. And with that, the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon is adjourned.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.